Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Mary Matte. Thanks so much for joining us. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content, including the Thursday Throwdown, your midweek dose of media madness, where basically after Monday morning, there's all these other clips that happen in the media. So what happens is on Thursday, the Thursday Throwdown, we make fun of all those clips that happen in between Monday morning and, let's say, whenever we record it, which is, late Wednesday. So you're getting truly the madness of the midweek. And if you're not getting the Thursday Throwdown, you're missing out on all that madness.
If you're not getting Thursday Throwdown, what are you actually doing with your life? What are you getting from life?
And how are you getting over that the hump day? How are you getting over the midweek? It's that's what we're there to do. So that's at usefulidiotspodcast.com.
All righty. Shall we start with the 4 basic food groups? Let's go with Democrats suck. What do we got, Aaron?
One of Trump's first moves after taking office for the second time was to revoke the security clearances of a number of former intelligence officials who signed that letter infamously declaring that the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian operation. And now John Brennan, former director of the CIA turned analyst on Democratic media outlet MSNBC, is here to clear his name because he wants you to know that contrary to what Trump said, he never, ever claimed that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. This is John Brennan's clarification.
As you pointed out, he misrepresented the facts in that executive order because it said that we had suggested that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. No, we said it was for the hallmarks of Russian information operations, including the dumping of accurate information, which is what we said in that letter.
So John Brennan is outraged because his good reputation has been besmirched by Donald J. Trump, because John Brennan wants you to know he never said the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. He, in fact, said it was a Russian information operation, Russia spreading accurate information in a bid to smear Hunter Biden. First of all, I think it's a distinction without a difference, because the point is, whether you think the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation or actual emails, the point is the claim that it came from Russia was a lie. It was disinformation. The whole point of making this declaration that Brennan and these other former intelligence officials did was to discredit the reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop, and by dismissing it as the work of Russia, whether it's disinformation or accurate, doesn't really matter. And second of all, the other problem here is that the way this was presented in the media by these intelligence officials and their media stenographers, which they never corrected and in fact spread themselves, was that this was indeed Russian disinformation. So for those who forget, look at how Politico, which was the first to report this claim from Brennan and these others, look how they reported it back in 2020. Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo, dozens of former intelligence officials say. Did John Brennan go out of his way to correct Natasha Bertrand and Politico? No, they let this lie spread. And in fact, when Brennan's close colleague, James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, when he went on CNN, he also explicitly said that this was indeed disinformation. This is his exchange at the time with Aaron Burnett of CNN.
And to me, this is just classic textbook Soviet-Russian tradecraft at work. The Russians have analyzed the target. They understand that the president and his enablers crave dirt on Vice President Biden, whether it's real or contrived, it doesn't matter to them. And so all of a sudden, two and a half weeks before the election, this laptop appears somehow without emails on it without any metadata.
So you see what he's doing there? He's saying, real or contrived, but then he goes and pushes the line that it's contrived because he says these emails have appeared without any metadata, which means that they would be faked. And just to put a button on that, Clapper then makes this point again in response to Aaron Burnett.
Do you think stuff like that could just have been planted in there and be completely fake?
I do. I think the emails could be contrived, particularly since, as I understand it from what I've read, they appear without any metadata. That is, from, to, and any technical data, at least immediately evident.
So there's James Clapper, who signed this letter along with John Brennan, pushing this notion, this fake notion, that the data on the laptop was contrived, aka it's disinformation. So that claim was a lie, as is the claim that this came from Russia, because the laptop actually came from Hunter Biden when he dropped it off at a Delaware repair shop. And now John Brennan wants you to know that's not what they intended. And it's just so funny that this story, which was just such a lie, continues to persist so many years later, and people are still defending it.
Yeah, and that they lie so shamelessly about it.
And that's what intelligence officials do. And meanwhile, these same people are up in arms about Tulsi Gabbard coming in. There's a big controversy over her nomination to be the successor to someone like James Clapper, who formerly served in that role. Well, whatever you can say about Tulsi Gabbard, there's a lot to criticize, but she never pushed an outright scam like the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation story, or the Iraq WMD hoax, which both John Brennan and James Clapper pushed. In fact, James Clapper in his memoir, he has this line where he says, in trying to get intelligence that matched what the Bush administration wanted us to say, it seems like we were looking for things that weren't actually there. So that's a euphemistic way of saying that they lied. They lied.
Right.
And that's what intelligence officials do. And that's what they did here with the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Well, that certainly is a lot of Democrat sucking. So for Republican suck, those of you who are lucky enough to give yourselves the gift of Thursday Throwdown, you saw us comment on some really interesting things that Elise Stefanik, Trump's pick for UN ambassador, had to say about the West Bank. But that wasn't all that she had to say. So here is more of her being questioned by Senator Chris Van Hollen about her thoughts on Israel and Palestine. Let's take a look.
I asked you in my office also about whether Palestinians have the right of self-determination. My understanding was you said yes. Do you have a different answer today?
That was not the direct question that we discussed. I said the Palestinian people.
You believe that Palestinians have the right of self-determination?
I believe the Palestinian people deserve so much better than the failures that they've had
We agree
from
on
terrorist
that. It's
leadership.
just a pretty simple question.
And I believe we need
I take it
peace in the region. Of course, they deserve human rights.
So
I want to ensure that, number one, we bring the hostages home.
So do all of us. Representative Stefanik, let me just ask you. I have 30 seconds left. I'm rarely surprised by answers in my office, but I did ask you whether you subscribe to the views of Finance Minister Smotrich.
Of who? I'm sorry, Finance.
Smotrich, this is the Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich, and the former National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, who believe that Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank. And in that conversation, you told me that, yes, you shared that view. Is that your view today?
Yes.
So there you have it. Elise Stefanik not even pretending to believe that Palestinians have the right to self-determination. Now, that is usually something that people pretend that they believe in, even though they don't actually make it possible, even though they don't provide any kind of like policy follow-up. They at least pay lip service to these very basic ideas of democracy, self-determination, blah, blah, blah. But she doesn't even do that. It's actually, maybe she's more honest than the other people.
Oh, well, she's so much more honest because that is the policy in Washington, bipartisan, to deny Palestinians the right to self-determination. That is the official policy. That's been every single president. No one has ever done anything remotely in the direction of granting Palestinians their minimal right to self-determination. Nothing. So she's playing the policy, but it's just amazing that she feels comfortable admitting to it because if you're such a racist that you can't even pretend to support someone's right to self-determination, it just says a lot. But she doesn't care because she's so committed to Israel. And that line there where she's like, when she's asked if she supports Palestine's right to self-determination, she says they deserve so much more, right, than what they currently have. Okay, well, how about self-determination? Do they deserve that? The answer is no, no. In her eyes, they don't. And and this, by the way, this is the fundamental problem. This is that right there. That answer from her crystallizes why we have a Middle East conflict to begin with. It's because Israel, with U.S. support, is devoted to denying Palestinians the right to self-determination. That's what it's all about. That's where it all starts from. Both parties. So both parties are guilty for this, but Elise Stefanik represents that extreme wing that is so committed to this policy that they're open and willing to flaunt that they just will not grant Palestinians the right to their own land, in their own ancestral homeland that was stolen from them.
So maybe she's qualified for the job because maybe she's more honest than everyone else. And of course, Elise Stefanik is not honest. I mean, she's doing an obvious pivot away from this, kind of a deflection, but she won't say that they deserve self-determination. And she's also a reminder, she's one of the people who went after the university administrations for being anti-Semitic. And she did that in a really dishonest way. So she's at least consistent. But Elise Stefanik is not the only person who has interesting things to say about Israel and Palestine. Let's take a look at the guy who's pushing for her, Donald Trump, President Trump. Here is Trump talking about what he sees as the future for Gaza.
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. You know, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
There you have it. Trump making it quite plain that he's excited about some potential rebuilding of Gaza, maybe hinting at some real estate opportunities. And that should come as no surprise because, of course, his son-in-law also mentioned that it has wonderful beachfront property. And here's an interesting tidbit of news from Lever News. Days before the ceasefire, Jared Kushner doubled his stake in an Israeli firm invested in illegal settlements in the West Bank and Golan Heights. Now Trump is interested in rebuilding Gaza, a phenomenal location right on the sea, the best weather. That's maybe one of the differences between Trump and Biden. I think that, Biden was really motivated by a racist Zionism, true ideologue, and Trump is motivated by real estate interests. And of course, being funded by Miriam Adelson, but I think mostly real estate, yeah.
What a choice.
What
the
a choice,
bigot,
yeah.
the bigot versus the profiteer,
Right.
of course. Palestinians lose no matter what, and so does the rest of the world, because no matter what, all this fuels is conflict and carnage.
Right. And, I feel like, Aaron, you're not really recognizing Trump in all his humanity. He, too, is a bigot. You're right. There is the element of war profiteering, but we should remember that he, of course, called Biden a Palestinian as a smear.
Very
Yeah.
true. Very true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't want to deny Trump his bigotry. Fair enough.
Yeah.
For isn't that weird? Continuing on the theme of bigots talking about Palestine, let's look at this controversy this week when Elon Musk, who has been upstaging President Trump over the course of the last several weeks since Trump's election, Elon Musk caused a new stir when he gave what many interpreted to be a Nazi salute. It did look like a Nazi salute to me. What happened in the immediate aftermath? Well, people who love to accuse anyone and anything of anti-Semitism, if it is critical of Israel, rushed, of course, to defend Elon Musk. For example, the Anti-Defamation League, which put out this really long-winded statement urging everyone to take a step back and give Elon Musk a break. This is some of what the ADL said. This is a delicate moment. It's a new day, yet so many are on edge. Our politics are inflamed, and social media only adds to the anxiety. It seems Elon Musk made an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute. But again, we appreciate the people are on edge, blah, blah, blah. To be honest with you, I actually strongly doubt personally that Elon Musk meant to give a Nazi salute. I do think he's an awkward guy. I do think, he does have some, far right views. So it's possible that subconsciously there is like a Nazi salute in him. But I don't think that was like certainly a conscious thing on his part. But regardless, it's just so funny that the ADL, which like screams anti-Semitism at college students protesting genocide, just rushes to give this like nuanced take about Elon defending him. And why do they do that? It's because Elon Musk has kissed the ring ever since Elon Musk got in trouble about some anti-Semitic things he said on Twitter. And then basically to repent, became a stooge of the ADL and went to Auschwitz with Ben Shapiro and just tried to do PR to cover up for the fact that he had posted anti-Semitic messages, including going after the ADL. He had talked about them as a problem because they were trying to undermine his ad revenue on Twitter/X. So here, for example, is the headline from Musk's visit to Auschwitz. Elon Musk visits Auschwitz after uproar over anti-Semitic messages on X. And I should say, I can't remember if the messages were directed at the ADL, but certainly he was mad at the ADL because they were then using that controversy to undermine his ad revenue. And that's what the ADL does, is they do shakedowns. Like they basically threaten to accuse you of being an anti-Semite unless you give them money and do what they want, which is kiss the ring of Israel, which is exactly what Elon Musk did. He went over and met with Benjamin Netanyahu. They toured sites of October 7th, spread false claims about what actually happened on October 7th, and basically did the manufacturing consent for genocide that the ADL does.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that Elon Musk was probably intentionally doing this, but as a trolling exercise. I think he knew that there would be this a response. I think it's useful, though, extremely useful, because it does highlight the ADL's hypocrisy. And, look, just so people have a sense of the kinds of comments that he did make on Twitter, the kinds of comments that got the ADL mad at him, he did say, he did post back in November of 2023, he posted, Jewish communities have been pushing the exact kind of dialectical hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. And his post also referred to hordes of minorities flooding Western countries. He quote tweeted that and said, "You have said the actual truth." But as you said, Aaron, it's very useful to look at how the ADL doesn't care about anti-Semitism, because surely, if they did, they'd be more worried about the potential for Elon to have done that. And the biggest point is that they don't give anyone the benefit of the doubt. In fact, there's actually footage of Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, comparing keffiyehs to swastikas.
Yeah, they had some database where they counted anti-Semitic incidents, and they basically count any expression of protest against the genocide in Gaza as anti-Semitic. So, I mean, they have less than zero credibility.
Yeah. And, we should also give credit to people like Batya Ungar-Sargon, who is at Newsweek. She is a very proud Zionist, and she was happy to come to the defense of Elon Musk. She said of Elon Musk, "As a person with a strong track record of criticizing Elon Musk, I feel extremely confident asserting that this was not a Nazi salute. Elon Musk is a friend to the Jews. This is a man with Asperger's exuberantly throwing his heart to the crowd. We don't need to invent outrage." But that's interesting because Batya was very quick to invent outrage at another point. I don't know if people remember the director, Jonathan Glazer, the director of Zone of Interest, this excellent film. At the Oscars, his acceptance speech said, "Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people." Well, you know how Batya responded to that? She tweeted out, "I simply cannot fathom the moral rot in someone's soul that leads them to win an award for a movie about the Holocaust, and with the platform given to them to accept that award by saying, 'We stand here as men who refute their Jewishness.'" So she somehow doesn't give them the benefit of the doubt of literally reading their full sentence.
But we are equal opportunity here. And so do you want to know who else I think has no credibility on the issue of white supremacy and Nazis? Democrats, because of what they've done in Ukraine by supporting literal white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And one of them is named Chris Murphy. Let's first of all, before we get at this record in Ukraine, let's hear what he had to say about Elon Musk and this controversy.
And listen, what I think is so dangerous about this broader moment is that there are these signals being sent to really dangerous, fringe, violent groups on the right. Fringe right groups, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, that Trump's with you. The pardons essentially were a message that there is immunity for political violence. And all throughout Telegram and far-right channels on Monday night, that Musk neo-Nazi salute was being amplified as evidence.
Nick Fuentes thinks it was a Nazi salute.
I mean, Proud Boys, other groups saying Trump's got our back, right? The white, the white supremacy cause is back in vogue, and that makes for an explosive moment politically and physically in our political space right now.
Okay, so that's Chris Murphy, talking about white supremacy on the right, how it's supported, and there's a lot of truth to that. But I don't think he has any credibility on this topic, because in Ukraine, where Murphy was part of the U.S. delegation in December 2013 that encouraged regime change, Murphy cavorted with literal white supremacists and neo-Nazis. This, for example, is a photo of him and John McCain with one of them. So the man there on the far right of the screen, and also on the far right of the political spectrum, is named Ole Tanibuk. He was leader at the time of Ukraine's Svoboda party. And what is Svoboda? Well, it's a party that the European Parliament, just 1 year before this picture was taken, had denounced as, quote, racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic, and urged any politician, quote, not to associate with, endorse, or form coalitions with. And that's because people like Tanibuk had said things like, we have to fight the, quote, Muscovite Jewish mafia running Ukraine, okay? And Chris Murphy went and cavorted with this guy, appeared with him on stage, and supported what became a coup in Ukraine just a few months later. And has Chris Murphy ever apologized for this? No. He's actually just supported groups like Svoboda and their allies, including in the Azov Battalion. The Biden administration last year, they lifted a State Department ban on arming the Azov Battalion, which is a neo-Nazi paramilitary group. And just to illustrate, the hypocrisy of all this and like where liberal Western culture has whitewashed white supremacists inside Ukraine, just compare two Guardian headlines from different points in time. Look at this image here. At the top of the screen, that's a headline from 2018 in The Guardian. Neo-Nazi groups recruit Britons to fight in Ukraine. Okay? That's 2018 in The Guardian. This headline was from this month, so 2025 in The Guardian. Same topic of neo-Nazis recruiting foreigners to fight in Ukraine, but look at how they've changed it. Ukraine's highest profile combat unit to recruit English-speaking soldiers. And that unit is the same aforementioned neo-Nazi group, which is the Azov Battalion.
What changed, Aaron?
What changed was Russia invaded finally in February 2022. And then after that, you couldn't say anymore that we were supporting neo-Nazis inside of Ukraine, or that the cyber war inside Ukraine was neo-Nazis. That's what's changed. So, and this includes, by the way, people like AOC, who's been leading the charge and calling out the hypocrisy around Elon. And fair enough, like I agree with her in going after the ADL. She's made some very good points, but she also has said nothing about the fact that we're arming neo-Nazis inside of Ukraine. And this doesn't mean that every military force in Ukraine is neo-Nazi. They are a minority, but they're a very strong minority, as is exemplified by the fact that Chris Murphy was on stage with one of their leaders back in 2013.
So isn't that terrible? We have a really terrible piece of news. Now, I'm not going to show the video, but there is a video that's been going viral on Twitter, and it shows an Israeli teenager throwing a kitten off of a balcony. And of course, he's like doing it gleefully, much like we see Israeli soldiers gleefully engaging in war crimes and genocide, and gleefully posing in front of destroyed hospitals, gleefully wearing the lingerie of women that they've ethnically cleansed. We see this teenager, a 17-year-old, demonstrating the same gleeful sociopathy as he throws a kitten from the 5th floor balcony of his apartment building in Jerusalem. So what's interesting is that he's been arrested. Now, it is interesting that it seems like it's easier to arrest someone for throwing a kitten off the roof than it is to arrest someone for, let's say, if you're a soldier and you rape some Palestinians. Because as we know, when Israeli police tried to arrest soldiers who had raped Palestinian prisoners, Palestinian hostages, Palestinian prisoners of genocide, basically, there were riots about it. But I don't see any riots about the arrest of this boy. Who knows? Maybe they will have much like they had right to rape riots, maybe they'll have right to kill cat riots. But I also think it's an interesting contrast, this sociopathy that we see demonstrated by Israelis. And I should also note that his friends were there laughing at it, because what's funnier than throwing a kitten to its death? But let's contrast this behavior with the behavior of Palestinians who are being subjected to a genocide and yet somehow manage to show more compassion to their animals than Israelis do to Palestinian human beings. Let's take a look at some of these videos. So this is the girl saying she couldn't leave her cat behind. An adorable cat. The shelling started, so we left, and I took her with me. Here's a boy, a teenage boy, who has rescued a cat from the rubble, and he himself is bleeding and covered in dust. And then he's at the hospital, and we see him at the hospital being tended to, and he has his cat on his lap as he's lying down on a hospital bed. And there's tons more footage of people not only taking care of them and rescuing them, but also giving them food. And we're talking about people who don't even have enough food for themselves. So that's isn't that terrible on the one hand, and isn't that also inspiring and incredibly moving on the other hand? Yeah.
Well, this is an example of the contrast between an occupying population and the occupied. The occupier has to become a monster to be able to justify what they're doing and carry it out. And there's something about being the target of oppression that forces you to dig deep until your reservoirs of humanity to be able to survive. And nobody embodies that more than Palestinians in terms of finding their humanity. And no one embodies evil, I think, more on this planet than the Israeli government, which is just taken a decades-long military occupation founded on ethnic cleansing into a genocide over the last year plus.
And unfortunately, it trickles down. It's not just the government, because obviously Israel is a society that's fully militarized. Everyone, with some exceptions, like religious exemptions, serves in the military. And given that the military is kind of the instrument of genocide, I think it trickles down to people who are not active soldiers. And that's why you see people throwing cats from roofs. And also, one other thing is that in terms of the difference in the treatment of hostages, we saw a girl, an Israeli captive. We saw her being able to be released by Hamas, also with her little adorable Shih Tzu. So she was able to keep her dog, and the dog was able to survive also. So just, again, huge contrast.
And those have been your 4 basic food groups.
We are really excited to be speaking to Arnaud Bertrand, who is a French entrepreneur. He lived in China for 8 years, and he has a really excellent analysis of China, of the relationship between China and the West. And you should definitely follow him on Twitter, where his handle is Arnaud Bertrand. That's RNAUDBERTRAND. And he's going to talk to us about many things, including TikTok. Arnaud Bertrand, thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation.
Of course. You have so many insights into so many different areas, but I thought we would start off with TikTok, because I think that's a subject that's on everyone's minds. What are your thoughts on what is happening right now with TikTok? And can you just set up the history of TikTok?
Yes, so it's quite complicated because quite a lot happened. So basically, TikTok is the international version of a Chinese app called Douyin, which is set up by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And so, as everyone knows, it's grown extremely popular in the West. I think the number of users in the US is 170 million, if I'm not mistaken. What's happened? I mean, I guess I don't need to tell people that is there was this project to ban it in the US. A lot of people refer to it as reciprocity with what China is doing with a lot of American apps. But I think it's important to dispel this notion because it's not exactly correct. What China has done is basically saying that there are some rules that all the companies have to abide by. On censorship, data storage, all the data needs to be stored in China, and so on and so forth. And basically, if you don't abide by those rules, you can't operate in China. And so all the companies, American companies that are actually blocked by what you call the Great Firewall in China, are companies that don't abide by China's rules. The TikTok thing is very different because TikTok actually abides by all the rules, even on censorship. because there are some rules on censorship in the US. And, there were a lot of articles around the fact that they had hired a lot of ex-CIA, ex-FBI, and so on in their team to monitor their content and so on. So they're playing the game. So they're not getting banned because of that, but purely because they're a Chinese company. And the law is actually, if you stop being a Chinese company, if you sell to us, basically, then you're not getting banned. So it's a very different nature from what China is doing. And what happened is, as the ban was about to take effect, you saw this migration, which is, I think, a first in the history of U.S.-China relations, where a lot of TikTok users migrated to another Chinese service called Xiaohongshu. Red Note is the English name, as sort of a protest movement to, find another platform where they could post content if TikTok was indeed getting banned, and also, express their discontent with the American government by going on an actual Chinese platform, because Xiaohongshu is, on TikTok, you always say that it's Chinese, but there are no Chinese users and there is no Chinese content. All the content there is generated in the West by Western users, and all the Chinese content on TikTok is actually on Douyin. It's not on TikTok at all. Whereas Xiaohongshu is a pure Chinese platform with, before the migration, only Chinese users and only Chinese content. So it's quite funny to see that how that all backfired in order to stop Chinese influence in social media in the US. Then you get a migration movement to an app that actually is orders of magnitude more Chinese influence.
Right.
And then the latest episode, of course, Trump moved to unban TikTok. I mean, it remains to be seen what will happen, but at least TikTok is back online in the US with some added censorship in. Apparently, I mean, some people are sharing that there are some things that they can't express anymore, like Free Palestine or things like that. I don't know exactly what happened there, but yeah. So that's basically the whole episode as it happened.
And so did China have to change Red Note to make it accessible to people outside of China?
No, it was accessible.
It always was. Okay.
Yeah, but there were some changes, because at first there was no translation function, for instance. So you had those American users just posting stuff in English, and then the Chinese users replying in Chinese, and no one had any idea what they were saying to each other. So they added a bunch of features in order to make the exchanges more smooth. But otherwise, it was fully open before. And actually you had some very touching moments, like one of the very trendy things right now is something called Letters by Li Hua, where it's extremely viral on Xiaohongshu right now, where at school a lot of Chinese people, as English homework, they had to write letters to an imaginary, friend in the US, and Simon or whatever, and they would always have to sign as someone called Li Hua. Like, imagine you're Li Hua sending a letter to someone in the US. And of course, they all knew that that letter was never going to be read by anyone. But what a lot of Chinese users are doing right now is they're posting those letters from their, school homework, like 10, 20 years ago, on Xiaohongshu, and you have Americans replying, saying, I'm sorry it took me so long to reply to your letter. So you have quite touching exchanges like that. It's actually very, very nice to see, you have the awful rhetoric at the top, on the tension, geopolitical tension between China and the US, but it's nice to see that there is still some way for the people to actually connect.
So another example of like the U.S. bringing people together unintentionally, kind of like they do with China and Russia also.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What about DeepSeek? What is DeepSeek, and what is the relationship between DeepSeek and TikTok and also OpenAI?
Okay, so there is no relationship between DeepSeek and TikTok. So DeepSeek is basically a sub company of almost like a side project of a Chinese hedge fund who they bought an awful lot of GPUs because they do quant stuff like they trade with algorithms and so on. And those GPUs they couldn't use when the market was closed, and so they said, in order to make use of those GPUs that we have anyway, let's just hire a couple of guys to basically build LLM, large language model, on the side with those GPUs when they aren't used. And the funny thing is that LLM now is, there have been a few versions of it, but it comes on par with the top American LLMs, like ChatGPT, the latest models, Claude from Anthropic, and so on. And they're offering it essentially for free, open source. So you can either use their API at a cost 3% the cost of the API of OpenAI, or you can use it for free by downloading it and running it on your own server or computer, which is also quite extremely impactful because it completely questions the whole business model of OpenAI, because you have this competitor rising out of nowhere, like this hedge fund doing that as their side project. They only spent $6 million to develop the LLM, when OpenAI spent hundreds of millions, and they come up with something that's just as good, actually even better on a lot of benchmarks, and they're offering it for free. So that's an interesting development as well, and it's becoming extremely popular. If you check Twitter right now, everyone's speaking about AI, like they're adopting DeepSeek massively because it's free and it's just as good. So why not?
Wow. Going back to the TikTok discussion, can you talk about the way that Palestine and Israel are covered on TikTok? Because I think, contrary to popular belief, there is actually censorship of that issue, right? But it's despite that censorship that you still see more pro-Palestine content, just because of, I think, the demographics of who's on TikTok. So can you talk about the way Palestine and Israel are kind of treated and presented on TikTok, and how that perhaps has encouraged, given more enthusiasm to the attempt to ban it?
Yeah, so full disclaimer, I don't use TikTok, so I'm not that familiar with the discussions going on there. I've just seen some numbers shared that indeed there were way more pro-Palestinian posts than pro-Israeli, but that's a reflection of society, right? Especially when you look at that demographic of young users. And I don't see how that's significantly different from X, for instance. I'm on X every day, and I see, orders of magnitude more pro-Palestinian content than pro-Israeli. So while that may have been used as an argument maybe to sway some congressmen who are, very pro-Israeli and so on, I don't think that is the main reason behind the TikTok ban. I think the main reason, plus, as you say, there were some articles on the fact that they do censor content. They do have all the national security types in their team. The data is stored in the US with Oracle, which is headed by a very pro-Israeli guy. So I don't think that is. I know a lot of people are saying that that is the main deal with TikTok, but I don't think it is. I think the main deal is the fact that it is a Chinese platform, and they want American companies to have a monopoly on social media.
Trump has now ordered, very smartly, taking advantage of the Democrats banning TikTok, even though Trump actually tried to do it when he was in office the first time.
Yeah.
Trump has ordered a delay of this ban for 75 days. And now he thinks he can push through, I guess, some kind of deal that forces ByteDance to sell its American stake in TikTok. Do you think ByteDance will go for that? Do they have any incentive to do that? I'm curious also, like, your thoughts as an entrepreneur. I mean, how normal is this that a government can try to force a major company to try to just sell itself? As this is the kind of stuff that like Cuba would get accused of, and talking about the evils of communism, like appropriating enterprises. And now it's like the Trump administration, preceded by the Biden administration, trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, if this goes through, it sets a very worrying precedent, because basically what it's saying is that if as a foreign tech company, a non-American tech company, you make it big, and there aren't that many when you think about it. I think TikTok is actually the only non-US social media that made it this big. So that situation itself is unprecedented. And the message that it's sending is, if you do make it big, then basically we're going to try to colonize you. It's digital colonialism in a way. So that's a very bad precedent. I think that's, I mean, I can't speak to what TikTok or ByteDance is going to do, but I think we all have a big collective interest in, as non-Americans. I mean, anyone who is outside the US who wants to have entrepreneurs that do make it big, coming from their country, has an interest in not getting this precedent set, right? Because then it completely destroys the incentive for any country. Like it's already so hard to succeed given the odds on how dominated the landscape is by American VCs, American tech companies, and so on. If you're one of the lucky few that finally make it, then you're forced to sell to the Americans. It's definitely not right, and that's a precedent that I don't think should be set.
As Aaron alluded to, I mean, it is kind of ironic that the United States government, which presents itself as this bastion of free speech, entrepreneurship, free market, where the government doesn't meddle, it's ironic that they are doing exactly that. I mean, we're used to the hypocrisy, I think, around free speech, but it is pretty funny that they vilify China as this country that has a government that is controls everything, right? No. Whereas we, in theory, have a free market, right? The invisible hand. And yet we're doing exactly that when it comes to a very popular Chinese platform.
Yeah. And I mean, TikTok is not the first. It's we had an interesting precedent in France. I don't know if you followed this story, the Alstom story.
Oh yeah, please talk about that.
We got one of our biggest company, most iconic company, literally stolen by the Americans. They put one of the top executives in jail in the US until the company sold itself to GE. So that was a forced sale as well. It's something that they've done previously, and they try to do something similar-ish with Huawei, where they also captured the daughter of the founder. In Canada, actually, Canada acted on the US behalf, And there was this whole fight, and unlike France, which yielded and sold Alstom to GE, China fought to the bitter end all the way until Meng Wanzhou, who was the daughter of the founder of Huawei, got released. So yeah, it is as you say, extremely hypocritical. It's like it's free market for American companies. Like you should welcome us freely, but as soon as there is any challenge from foreign companies, then the free market doesn't stand anymore.
Can you talk more about this digital colonialism that you just referred to and the different iterations of colonialism that we're seeing, like neocolonialism that we see when it comes to the relationship between the West and China?
Yes, so I mean, digital colonialism, it's actually something that is done on most countries, but not China, because China was smart enough to recognize that the digital world was a territory, and that they had to keep their sovereignty over it. That's why they erected the so-called Great Firewall, which enabled them to have their own ecosystem of companies emerge and not be completely dominated by American companies. And when you look around the world, that's pretty much the only place where that happened, right? If you look at Europe, where I come from, the picture is extraordinarily bleak. You literally have, I mean, the only example, I guess, is Spotify. But then again, they are now headquarters in the US. And apart from them, you have virtually no European big success story. If you look at all the European presidents, to speak to their own population right now, they have to use American social media, which is, kind of strange when you think about it, to express, to shape the narrative for your own population through Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, which is controlled by the American. It's really, it's like a sword of Damocles over your head. It's strategically speaking, it's not healthy at all.
I was hoping that you could respond to this clip of Donald Trump. Here he's vowing to hit the European Union with tariffs and saying that his administration was discussing a 10% punitive duty on Chinese imports by February 1 because fentanyl is being sent from China to the US via Mexico and Canada. So let's take a look and then get your reaction.
We're talking about a tariff of 10% on China based on the fact that they're sending fentanyl to Mexico and Canada.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Trump does love his tariffs, doesn't he? I mean, the fentanyl stuff is, I think it's largely bullshit. I looked at it at some point. China doesn't send fentanyl, first of all. What they sell is a precursor to the drug, which can have multiple use. It's as far as I remember, it's stuff that is widely used in the pharmaceutical industry and so on. So it's actually quite hard to understand if it's hard for China to track down after they sell the stuff if it's going to be used to make fentanyl or not. And the fentanyl is actually not made in China, but I guess in Mexico or Latin America. So I don't know the measure of control that China would have around that. I think it's just an excuse to put a 10% tariff. And then tariff, I don't think it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's something that's paid by the American people. It's a tax on the American people. It's not something that China is paying. It's just going to make everything more expensive, basically, for Americans. I guess the hope is that as tariffs rise, American manufacturing is going to take over. but that takes years to set up manufacturing. And do Americans really want to get back to manufacturing jobs anyway? Will there ever be manufacturing has changed a lot. It's a lot robotized. America is way behind in that. So all of this is, I think it's a strategy that at the end of the day is just going to make things more expensive. And I don't think I don't buy the great American manufacturing revival, or if it ever going to happen, it's going to take a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, great job to everyone who deindustrialized the U.S. and shipped jobs overseas and is now thinking they can make up for it by just imposing tariffs on everybody else who actually still does have a manufacturing base. But Trump loves tariffs so much that he's even threatening tariffs on Russia. He said in a post he put out the other day that, like, if Putin doesn't negotiate a peace deal in Ukraine, he'll be forced to impose new tariffs on Russia. And my first reaction was like, well, what is there to impose a tariff on? Because there is basically no trade right now between the U.S. and Russia because of the Ukraine war, because of all the sanctions that the U.S. imposed on Russia in response to that. So I'm not even sure what he could do there tariff-wise if he wanted to. And, Arnaud, as someone I know who's followed the Ukraine war very closely, what is your response to that? That Trump basically saying that he's already willing to threaten Russia immediately with tariffs and sanctions as if Russia isn't already sanctioned extensively. And what is there to tariff if there's no trade?
Yeah, I think there is still a tiny bit of trade between Russia and the US on, strategic commodities that there are a lot of commodities out there that only Russia is selling, right? A lot of rare minerals and so on. And so when you say you're going to tariff Russia on those, Russia is like, presumably like, I mean, suit yourselves. We're the only ones who said those stuff. So it's like basically saying we're going to pay more for your stuff. So yeah, again, that makes very little sense. And then in terms of sanctions, I mean, Russia is already probably the most sanctioned country on earth. If you think like they're out of the completely out of the Western financial system, out of the how is it called, this Belgian company that links banking. I mean, yeah, there an enormous amount of sanction has been put on them. We've seen the results. The Russian economy is actually doing very well. It's actually the fastest growing economy in Europe. It's pushed them and China much closer together. It's really started a much bigger divide between the West and the rest, with the rest more aligning on Russia's side than the US. So it's very strange for Trump to sort of double down on this failed strategy. So yeah, I don't really understand. I think it speaks more to the fact that Trump is trying. I think he wants a deal, and he's trying to sound tough, but he doesn't have anything to threaten Russia with, right? Like, save for actual war, which he wouldn't do. So he's just, putting out threats that are meaningless, and it reveals the weak strategic position that is in ahead of the negotiation, because he has nothing to really damaging to threaten Russia with.
Can you talk about the role of China in the both now and historically, since the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in that conflict, and how they try to intervene or facilitate a peace deal?
They did put out a 10-point deal that actually was pretty good because when you read on surprisingly pro-Ukraine, actually, when you read about it, there is a restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty, and Russia giving back all the territories that it annexed, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's point 1 or 2. But in exchange, there will be, some pretty big concession on the west part as well, rethinking Europe's security architecture around NATO and so on and so forth. I think it's a deal that they put out in good faith to really try to solve the problem for the long term, and to everyone's interest. Like Ukraine will see territorial integrity restored. I think it would have to be neutral in order not to threaten Russia anymore. The NATO question will be settled. All of that. And it's a shame that at first, when they released it, within less than 24 hours, without even considering it, everyone on the west side had rejected it, even within a few hours. I remember that day. It was quite painful to see. So it's basically, they wanted to just continue the war and not even think about a possible solution. I think a lot of people misunderstand China's position on the war. They actually used to have a good relation with Ukraine before the war, and it was quite embarrassing from China's standpoint because they've always been very big on sovereignty, on the territorial integrity. It's actually the whole Taiwan question is almost the opposite of the Ukraine war, because Taiwan to them, to China, and actually to all the countries in the world, is recognized as part of China's territory. And if Taiwan was ever to declare independence, it would be like a territorial integrity issue. So in a way similar to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So China didn't want to set the precedent where it would agree with a country just annexing someone else's territory, but on the other hand, it doesn't want to antagonize Russia, so it's kind of walking on eggshells, and that's why they're also a good player to find a solution, because they actually can be fairly neutral in this. Unfortunately, and they have incredible leverage with Russia, contrary to the US, of course. So it's a real shame that Europe didn't make use of them and just dismissed their proposal out of hand within hours.
But would you agree or disagree that Russia wouldn't have invaded Ukraine had it not had the tacit blessing of China? There was that famous meeting with Putin and Xi Jinping right before Russia invaded, and the impression I got was that basically Putin got Xi's approval or his blessing to do this, and that Russia would not have been able to sustain this war, or at least would have had a much harder time sustaining this war if it couldn't rely on the continued economic support of China. Do you think that's fair, or is that overblown?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. And nobody knows. Nobody knows what got said in that meeting. I mean, it's either or. Either it went on as you said, or Putin took the meeting in order to make it look like this, right? Like it straight out of the meeting. I mean, straight within a few days, the war starts. It's the optics obviously look like what you said, but I do think that it clashes so much with China's principles and all the rhetoric around territorial integrity that I would actually be extremely surprised if they gave their approval. I'm more in the camp that they didn't do it.
How does the Joe Biden's treatment of China compare to Trump's treatment of China?
I mean, same, because Biden basically just took Trump's. So Trump really started the very aggressive, very antagonistic shift after towards China after the Obama administration. Even though Obama kind of started it with his pivot to Asia, but there was still a part of engagement there. Trump shifted that to full-blown antagonism, basically, like he completely stopped any engagement, and Biden just kept going, and even more aggressively than Trump, I would say, like with the semiconductors move, that was extremely aggressive because it's effectively trying to stop the technological development of China, which is, when you think about it, a crazy thing to attempt to do, like stop the development of a nation of 1.4 billion people, which in effect means you want to impoverish them, right? Or at least make them, keep at the same level, make sure that they don't improve their living standards. It's really, really, morally abject to do something like that. And other things like trying to set up some hostile alliances in Asia, like AUKUS, that was a big initiative of Biden. You have the Quad. You have all the moves with the Philippines. I'm actually much more worried about the Philippines than I am about Taiwan. And let's see what the new Trump administration does. He sends some very mixed message. So on the one hand, he appointed Marco Rubio as Secretary of State with an extreme China hawk. And the ambassador that he appointed is also a China hawk, and actually a guy that doesn't know China at all. But he also invited Xi to his inauguration, which was a rather nice gesture. And he said some nice things. I think he kind of even hinted at proposing a G2. Like he said something to the effect of, if the US and China run the world together, there is no problem that we can't solve, stuff like that. So it's hard to see what we can expect. I suspect that he wants to do some sort of deal with China, to stabilize the situation and make it more sustainable for the future. But I think we can expect some of Trump's deal-making rhetoric and actions, like he's going to try to gain a lot of leverage against China in order to have a stronger negotiating position during that deal. But I think from China's standpoint, maybe Trump is slightly better because at least I think he's less ideological than Biden. I think he's open to a deal, whereas Biden is on the whole, liberal establishment in the US is extremely ideological. That China is evil, and we are never going to make a deal with them. Basically, that type of mindset.
And as someone who has lived in China and done the business there, like, what to you is the biggest misconception that people in the NATO world have about China, that you think should be corrected?
Oof, there are so many misconceptions that it's. China is a normal country. I guess that's. You sort of expect this dystopian nightmare where the government is, always on top of you and you have no freedom whatsoever. I mean, that's just not the impression you get at all when you're in China. Like, there are many things that you can do much more freely than in the West even. Like, for instance, one thing that I personally love to do is RV trips in China. Like, I rent an RV and I just travel around China, the country. And I've done similar trips in France. I've never done it in the US. But, RVs in France, for instance, are extremely regulated. Like, can't park your RV like everywhere. It's you have to be in a camping ground and you need to discharge your water in specific places and so on. In China, it's just pure freedom. Like, you can park it everywhere. Like, if we wanted to visit a specific historical site or a museum, we would just park it in the museum parking for the night and wake up and be right there, right? So it's just a normal place where you can do normal things and you have a lot of leeway to do everything that you might want to be doing in your daily life. Granted, what you can't do is start organizing a political force against the government. That's very different from the West. But as a foreigner, I was never going to do that anyway. So that's the point is kind of moot. But it doesn't mean that China doesn't have a lot of avenues for people to express their discontent. So, for instance, one service that they have is a hotline called 12345, which I've myself used many times. When you have any issue, trouble with anything related to the government or that the government can solve, you call them. And they have a contractual obligation to solve it for you, right? That's also something that we don't have in the West. So say that you have a local corrupted politician in your village, and that guy is harassing you or whatever. Then you will call this hotline, and that will be investigated and dealt with, right? So it's not like you don't have avenues to complain about your situation as a citizen or about the government. It's just that the way the political system is organized is vastly different. It's not a multi-party liberal democracy. But in daily life, it's not the dystopian nightmare that people imagine. It's actually an extremely pleasant life experience.
Another claim that we hear about China is that it has a very predatory relationship with Africa. What's your response to that allegation?
I think predatory. I think what they're doing essentially is they're doing deals where they need a lot of commodities from Africa, and in exchange, they're building stuff for the country, so infrastructure basically, all within the Belt and Road Initiative, and so they've built, a lot of railways, roads, stadium, and so on and so forth. I think when you look at it, it's a much less predatory way of dealing with Africa than, speaking as a French, than we were doing, basically, because in exchange for us taking the commodities of Africans, the Africans didn't see much of the fruits of that in their daily life. At least with China, the people benefit, right? Because it's infrastructure for everyone. It's not infrastructure in the way we were doing it when we were colonizing Africa, which was basically to serve us, to better extract those commodities. Like we would only build train lines, to go to bring the stuff to the port in order for us to better ship it. It's actually things that serve people in their daily life. No, I'm not a specialist of Africa, and I don't want to, claim that everything is extremely rosy. I'm sure there are some issues, but I think it's we don't have a right as Westerners to judge on this particular issue, because our own relationship with Africa has been extremely shameful, and so I think China is at least a big step up compared to this.
And what about, how would you say it compares to the way the U.S. interacts with other countries?
Countries in Africa, you mean?
Yeah, or developing nations, quote unquote.
I mean, the way there is this saying that every time the West goes to Africa, we get a lecture. Every time China comes, we get a hospital. So I think it's a bit of that. I don't think the Africa has seen a lot from the US. The US seems to be interested by Africa mostly in the geopolitical game, right? Because China is going there, is doing a lot of things in Africa, the BRI and so on. Then they get interested, or if Russia is involved during the Cold War or now. So they see Africa as a tool to lecture or to sort of contain China there, but they don't see Africa or Africans as a value in and of themselves. And I think that's another credit that we should give to China, because they've gone out to do deals with Africa, not as a way to contain the West or the US and so on, but genuinely, they have those relationships for a long time, global South relationship, in order to try to, help each other development. And there was a time when China was poorer than the poorest country in Africa, not that long ago. And I think they have much more legitimacy to share the learnings that they've made on their journey than the West, which doesn't really understand Africa's predicaments, because they've not been there themselves, and they see them through a very sort of paternalistic mindset. I think it's a very different type of relationship.
There's obviously a huge climate crisis, really driven home recently by the wildfires in Los Angeles. What role is China playing in combating this?
So, I mean, if you look at the green industry, China has enormous market share. So in solar panels, for instance, they're like 80, 90%. In most green related industry, they have done enormous efforts, and they are greenifying their energy mix at astounding pace. Like the types of projects that they're doing in green energy are on a scale that truly boggles the mind. Like recently they announced a new dam, for instance, on a river in Tibet that will generate, I think, enough electricity for the daily use of 100 million people or something like that. Like those types of projects, which is incredible. And they're doing the whole mix, like hydro, solar, wind, investing a lot in nuclear as well. They're even launching a project to launch a solar space station that will be 1 kilometer wide, take the energy from the sun in space and beam it by microwave down to Earth. So they're really going full in on this. And as a result, what we're seeing, I think, more and more in the West is as China is dominating green tech, green industries, then you're seeing either like Trump straight up climate change denialism, or you're seeing rhetoric like overcapacity or unfair Chinese subsidies or rhetoric like that. That means that we want to stop imports from China of things that could mitigate climate change, and the end result is the same effect as climate change denialism. You're not doing anything about it. So it's quite strange and quite sad to see that. But at least China, which is still to this day the country that emits the most carbon dioxide, at least they're going full on this, and they're very committed to it. So at least that's good.
The U.S. government has declared China's treatment of the Uyghurs as genocide. They emphatically refuse to call what Israel is doing to Gaza a genocide. What are your thoughts on those kind of simultaneous declarations?
Even Michael Pillsbury, who is he was working in the previous Trump administration, and he was one of the architects of Trump's shift to aggressivity towards China. He said that not one Uyghur died as a result of China's action. So what happened with the Uyghur stuff is there was a security crackdown because there were a lot of problems in Xinjiang, a lot of terrorist attacks. I think there were more than 100 terrorist attacks, including some very deadly ones. There was an especially bad one in the Kunming train station in Yunnan province that killed over 100 people. And so at some point, on those actions were committed by a group called ETIM, E-T-I-M, which is basically a separatist group that is very radical in their religious views. And what China did, I mean, you can completely discuss their action and so on, but you need to be clear on what they actually did. They tried to identify everyone who was an affiliate of that group or who shared the ideology, and basically they went through. The official name in China was Vocational Training Center, and I mean the name is a bit longer, but it was basically teaching them about playing a more constructive role in society, if to put it mildly. And the deal was either you do that and you learn a job, because they were learning jobs in the center like vocational training, and you reinsert yourself in society, or you go to prison. And that's what happened. And those centers remained open 2 years during 2017 and 2019. They've all been closed now, and that's it. That's the extent of what happened. And so a lot of those guys reinserted into society. A lot of them went to prison. There haven't been a single terrorist attack since. And simultaneously, they invested a lot in Xinjiang in order to make, because those separatist issues don't arise out of the blue. It's always because people have legitimate discontent, and so they did a lot of poverty alleviation initiative. They did a lot around tourism. What many people don't know is that Xinjiang is not the most visited province in China for tourists. I think there were more than 200 million tourists last year.
Wow.
Of course, that boosts the economy enormously. It's actually a very beautiful place. It has ski station, very high mountains. It has desert. It has grassland. It has almost everything. Like for tourism, it's a very nice place. And so basically that's Xinjiang. And comparing this to Gaza is completely indecent. It's got absolutely nothing to do.
And what happened here in the U.S. was Mike Pompeo and Antony Blinken declared that it was a genocide in Xinjiang, and they got some groups funded by the U.S. government to also say there was a genocide in Xinjiang, and that was enough for a lot of people in the media, including in the progressive left, I have to say, to believe it. And those of us who asked for evidence and said that this is not a genocide, there's repression, but not a genocide, were called genocide apologists. And that's just an example of how our propaganda system works. It's and of course now everyone's forgotten about it because, especially after the Gaza genocide, it's just so ridiculous to use that word for a place like Xinjiang when you have an actual mass murder campaign going on inside Gaza.
Actually, a lot of the allegations originated from one guy. I know you did an article on it in the Grey Zone. I'm actually the only person ever to have debated him.
Adrian Zenz.
Yeah, Adrian Zenz.
You debated him. Okay. Huh.
Yeah, I'm the only guy who ever debated him.
And who is he, by the way? Who is he? He is a Christian
he's a German
fundamentalist.
guy. Yeah, but he's an employee of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which is an anti-communist propaganda shop funded by an act of Congress and headquartered in Washington, I believe. That says everything you need to know about, like most of the stuff on Xinjiang comes from him. That says everything you need to know about those allegations.
And unfortunately, so many people were fooled by him, including a progressive show I used to work for, which brought him on as a serious expert. It was just such a transparent propaganda campaign, and everyone's moved on. It's like everyone was like, this was very fashionable for a while to say genocide. Everyone just forgotten about it now. It just shows how there's propaganda systems all around the world, including in China, but in the U.S. it works differently. But I would argue it's a lot more effective.
And just to clarify, it wasn't just Trump, or Pompeo, because Blinken, as recently as 2024, April 2024, says that genocide in Xinjiang is ongoing in a report that he released ahead of visiting China.
They're still seeing this. On something very interesting is that they're also using this with Europe. So Europe, we were about to make an extremely important trade deal with China that was very favorable to us, and that would have made us much closer to China. And we tried to pass it right between the transition between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, kind of discreetly during that period, because we knew it would piss off the Americans big time. And it did. I think Biden himself commented on it, Jake Sullivan and so on. Wait a couple of weeks until we get in office, and they did wait. Unfortunately, the Europeans, and then a couple of weeks after the start of the Biden administration, Europe, out of the blue, started to sanction some Chinese officials over Xinjiang after having spoken to the Americans. And immediately after, which is standard for China, they retaliated and sanctioned some members of European Parliament, the same number that the EU sanctioned in China. And Europe announced that the deal was dead. So it was dead over Xinjiang, over those allegations.
Well, Arnaud, this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Great speaking with you.
So that is our interview with Arnaud Bertrand. And you'll definitely, if you're not already subscribers to usefulidiotspodcast.com, you'll want to be, because in the Substack only portion of the interview, he talks about a lot of fascinating things, including myths about China, the claim that China is predatory with Africa, and the claim that China is engaging in a genocide of the Uyghurs. And again, that's at usefulidiotspodcast.com.
A guy with a heavy French accent take on China. Where else are you going to get that? But Useful Idiots. And very grateful to Arnaud, who I follow on X/Twitter, who's very insightful and great to meet him and hear from him and get his take. Very, very interesting stuff. So thank you to Arnaud for joining us. And thank you for tuning into Useful Idiots. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there to support the show. Get bonus content. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiotspodcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.